Anybody does any killing around here, I'll do it.
This is a private affair, Warden.
No, it ain't. This man's in my company.
The world thought it knew Frank Sinatra. The voice, the swagger, the rat-packed nights that never seemed to end. He built a legend so large it almost swallowed the man himself. But legends leave things behind. When the doors of his private estate were opened and its contents carefully examined, what surfaced wasn't just luxury or nostalgia. It was something far more revealing. Personal letters, hidden keepsakes, rooms frozen in time, pieces of a life that didn't always fit the image he sold to the world. Fans expected glamour. What they found instead told a quieter, more complicated story. And once you see it, it's hard to look at Sinatra the same way again. Before the fame, the brutal childhood that forged Frank Sinatra. Long before the world knew him as Frank Sinatra, before the nicknames, before the packed arenas and flashing cameras, there was just Francis Albert Sinatra, born on December 12, 1915, in a cramped tenement on Monroe Street in Hoboken, New Jersey. He arrived in the world as the only child of Italian immigrants, Natalina Dolly Garaventa and Antonino Martino Marty Sinatra, and from the very beginning, survival itself was part of his story. He weighed over 13 pounds at birth and had to be delivered with forceps, a brutal start that left deep scars on his cheek, neck, and ear and damaged his eardrum for life. At one point, he stopped breathing altogether. It was his grandmother who brought him back, running cold water over his tiny body until he finally gasped. Even his baptism had to wait. His body needed time to heal. Those early injuries never fully faded. A childhood surgery added more scars to his neck, and later, severe acne would mark his teenage years. He was raised Catholic, surrounded by ritual and discipline, but his real education came from home. Dolly ran that household with fierce energy. She was ambitious, sharp, and deeply involved in Hoboken politics. She worked as a midwife, acted as a translator for neighbors, and quietly operated an illegal abortion service for young Italian Catholic girls, earning herself the nickname Hatpin Dolly. Biographers would later say she shaped her son more than anyone else. Sinatra's fourth wife would eventually claim Dolly knocked him around as a child. But Dolly also filled him with confidence and hunger. She wanted her son to rise. Marty, on the other hand, was quiet and illiterate, a former bantamweight boxer who worked his way up to captain in the Hoboken Fire Department. He believed in education and once dreamed of his son becoming a civil engineer. Sinatra spent hours at his parents' tavern, doing homework behind the bar, sometimes singing for spare change. During the Great Depression, Dolly made sure he always had money for outings and stylish clothes, and neighbors started calling him the best-dressed kid on the block. He was thin, almost fragile-looking, a frame so skinny it would later become part of his stage humor. But inside that slight body was a growing obsession with music. Big band jazz grabbed him early. He listened endlessly to Gene Austin, Rudy Vallee, Russ Columbo, Bob Eberly, and especially Bing Crosby, studying phrasing and timing like a student cramming for exams. For his 15th birthday, his uncle gave him a ukulele, and Sinatra began performing at family gatherings. He arranged bands for school dances, but formal education never held him for long. He bounced between junior high and Hoboken High before getting expelled after just 47 days for general rowdiness. Trying to satisfy his mother, he enrolled in business school, then dropped out 11 months later. He delivered newspapers, worked as a riveter at a shipyard, and spent nights singing in local social clubs. Sometimes he sang on radio stations for free. In New York, he'd perform for meals or cigarettes. Whatever kept him close to music. Knowing his voice was his way out, Sinatra scraped together money for elocution lessons, paying $1 at a time to vocal coach John Quinlan, one of the first people to recognize how unusual his range really was. And quietly, between the scars, the setbacks, the small jobs, and the late-night songs, something was forming. Not the legend yet, just a determined young man chasing a sound, unaware that every step he was taking was leading him toward a life so big it would one day blur the line between who he was and who the world believed him to be. From nothing to an empire, the rise of Frank Sinatra. By his teenage years, Frank Sinatra was already chasing a microphone wherever he could find one. He couldn't read music, never learned. Everything came by ear. He listened, absorbed, and repeated until the sound lived inside him. His first real break came in 1935, when his mother convinced a small local singing group called the Three Flashes to let him tag along. One of the members later admitted Frank followed them around like they were gods. The truth was simpler. Sinatra owned a car. He could drive them to gigs. That was enough. Not long after joining, he found out the group was auditioning for Major Bose's amateur hour. Sinatra practically begged to be included. With him on board, they renamed themselves the Hoboken Four. They passed their audition, went on the show, and each earned $12.50. Then something unexpected happened. 40,000 votes poured in. They won first prize. A 6-month contract followed, taking them across America on radio and stage. Sinatra immediately became the lead singer. He also became the center of attention, especially from the girls, which didn't sit well with the rest of the group. Bose kept bringing them back under different names, reshuffling their identity again and again. But Frank was already separating himself from the pack. By 1938, he was singing for $15 a week as a waiter at a roadhouse in New Jersey called the Rustic Cabin. It wasn't glamorous, but the place was tied to a New York radio station, and soon Sinatra was performing live on air. The money was small, but he told friends he was going to become so big no one could ever touch him. In 1939, he recorded his first solo track. A few months later, band leader Harry James heard him sing and signed him on the spot. Sinatra joined James's orchestra for $75 a week and released his first commercial record. It barely sold. Neither did the next few. But his voice was changing. Vocal training had expanded his range. He could now sing higher, smoother, cleaner. Something was building, even if the charts didn't show it yet. Still, Sinatra felt boxed in. He wanted more. Bigger rooms, bigger crowds, bigger recognition. So in late 1939, he made a move that changed everything. He left Harry James and joined the band of Tommy Dorsey. His first appearance with Dorsey came in January 1940. He opened with Stardust, and the crowd felt it immediately. Dorsey later recalled standing there in disbelief, watching this skinny kid with big ears pull electricity out of the room. Dorsey became more than a band leader. He became a father figure. Sinatra studied everything about him: his posture, his discipline, his perfectionism. He even picked up Dorsey's hobby of collecting toy trains. Sinatra once said the only two people he had ever been afraid of were his mother and Tommy Dorsey. That first year with Dorsey was relentless. Sinatra recorded over 40 songs. His voice finally started climbing the charts. Polka Dots and Moonbeams. Then Say It. Then Imagination, his first top 10 hit. And then came I'll Never Smile Again, which stayed at #1 for 12 straight weeks. Suddenly, Frank Sinatra wasn't just another singer in a big band. He was becoming a phenomenon. But success brought tension. Sinatra wanted to record solo material. Dorsey resisted. When Sinatra finally got his chance in early 1942, he recorded several songs in one session. Hearing them played back stunned him. He couldn't believe how good he sounded. For the first time, he truly saw what he might become on his own. That realization changed everything. He wanted out. There was just one problem. His contract gave Dorsey 43% of his lifetime earnings. A brutal legal battle followed. Rumors swirled. Stories spread about mob pressure and backroom deals. Whatever really happened, by September 1942, Sinatra was free. Dorsey reportedly told him he hoped he'd fall on his ass. They never repaired their relationship. Sinatra stepped into solo stardom just as America was changing. He made his film debut in 1943. In 1945, he won a Special Academy Award for a short film promoting racial and religious tolerance. But after the war, the spotlight dimmed. His popularity slipped. Recording contracts vanished. Movie offers dried up. By the early 1950s, Sinatra was nearly finished. Then came the comeback. In 1953, he won an Oscar for his role in From Here to Eternity. It wasn't even a singing part, but it resurrected his career. That same year, he signed with Capitol Records, reinvented his sound, and returned with a deeper, jazzier voice that felt older, wiser, and sharper. The Sinatra of the 1950s was different, more controlled, more dangerous, more magnetic. He earned critical acclaim for films like The Man with the Golden Arm and The Manchurian Candidate. His records dominated again, and when Capitol began to limit him, Sinatra built his own label, Reprise, and launched his own film company. He wasn't just performing anymore. He was running his empire. By the mid-1960s, he was back on top. He headlined jazz festivals. He ruled Las Vegas. And alongside Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop, he became the face of the Rat Pack, a hard-living, fast-talking brotherhood that turned Vegas into their playground and Hollywood into their backdrop. They made movies. They drank too much. They owned the night. Sinatra scored massive hits like Strangers in the Night, recorded Something Stupid with his daughter Nancy, and added My Way to his legacy. A song that felt less like music and more like autobiography. Even the youth culture had to respect him. Jim Morrison once admitted that no one could touch him. After a brief retirement in the 1970s, Sinatra returned once more. He became politically active, campaigning for John F. Kennedy before later aligning himself with Ronald Reagan, who awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1985. From tenement rooms to world stages, from near collapse to total reinvention, Sinatra didn't just survive fame, he changed it. Inside Frank Sinatra's love life, the 4 women who defined him. For all the women who passed through his life, Frank Sinatra always circled back to one truth. He married 4 times. And somehow, he stayed emotionally connected to every woman who ever carried his name. The first was Nancy Sinatra, born Nancy Rose Barbato in Jersey City in 1917. Raised in a hard-working Italian-American household, led by a father who spent his days covered in plaster dust. Nancy met Frank long before the fame, back when they were just teenagers spending summers in Long Branch, New Jersey. She was 17. He was 19. They fell into each other quietly, naturally, before music ever paid the bills. They married on February 4, 1939, right in the middle of the Great Depression. Nancy went back to her secretary job. Frank went back to singing tableside for tips. No spotlight yet, just survival. Children came quickly. Daughter Nancy Sandra in 1940. Son Francis Wayne Jr. in 1944. Then Christina Tina in 1948. Nancy held the household together while Frank chased stages. She cooked. She sewed their clothes. She followed him on tour when she could. And when rumors of infidelity reached her ears, she stood her ground longer than most would have. Then came Ava Gardner. Frank met Ava at MGM Studios in 1947, and whatever restraint he had left disappeared. Nancy knew about the affair but refused divorce at first, holding on to what she called something too precious to give up. But by 1951, the marriage was over. Within days of the paperwork being finalized, Sinatra married Ava. It was fire meeting gasoline. Ava had been born in 1922 and raised in North Carolina and Virginia. By 18, she was already pulled into Hollywood. Frank first noticed her years earlier while she was still married to Mickey Rooney, but when they reconnected at MGM, she was no longer the Carolina girl he remembered. She had become something else entirely. He later admitted she stopped him cold. Studio executive Louis B. Mayer warned Ava about getting involved with a married man nearly a decade older. Neither listened. Their marriage was volatile from the start. Affairs on both sides. Explosive arguments. Ava later revealed she endured 2 aeons during that time, torn between wanting children and knowing Frank couldn't give her stability. As her career peaked, his collapsed. MGM dropped him. Record sales faded. Money tightened. They announced their divorce just 2 years after marrying, though it wasn't finalized until 1957. Still, they stayed friends until Ava died in 1990. By then, Sinatra had already lived another love story. In 1964, he met Mia Farrow on a studio lot. She was 19. He was nearly 50. Her career had just taken off. His was already legendary. They dated privately for a year before stepping out publicly. In July 1966, they married. Farrow later recalled barely remembering the vows, feeling dazed with happiness. She loved him completely. But 2 years later, while she was filming Rosemary's Baby, Sinatra had divorce papers delivered to her set. Age difference played its part. So did clashing views on her career. Farrow later explained that Sinatra saw himself as a provider and struggled to understand why she wanted more than domestic comfort. She went on to marry twice more and raise 14 children, but she always maintained that Sinatra was the great love of her life. Even decades later, she posted tender birthday tributes to him, calling him by his private nickname, Charlie Brown. They never truly let go of each other. And then there was his final chapter. Barbara Sinatra, born Barbara Blakely in Missouri in 1927, didn't meet Frank until much later. She had modeled for Vogue, married twice, and lived in Las Vegas as a showgirl before fate placed her next door to Sinatra and Ava in Rancho Mirage. Barbara first entered Frank's orbit through Ava, who asked her to be a doubles partner. What started quietly grew complicated. Sinatra and Barbara began seeing each other in secret, even as he went on to marry Mia Farrow, and Barbara remained married to Zeppo Marx. Time did what secrecy couldn't. Barbara divorced in 1973. Sinatra proposed with a massive diamond hidden in a champagne glass. They married on July 11, 1976, at Sunnylands, surrounded by over 100 guests, including Elvis Presley, Ronald Reagan, Sammy Davis Jr., and Gregory Peck. Barbara later wrote that even saying Mrs. Sinatra out loud felt unreal. Together, they built something quieter. They founded the Barbara Sinatra Children's Center to support abused children. They hosted charity golf tournaments. They played tennis, owned spaniels. Frank filled in crossword puzzles with ink every day. They renewed their vows on their 20th anniversary. This was not Rat Pack Sinatra. This was late life Sinatra. They stayed married until his death in 1998. Barbara passed in 2017, writing in her memoir that she had been the luckiest woman in the world. 4 marriages, endless headlines. But beneath all of it ran one consistent thread. Frank Sinatra never truly cut emotional ties. Nancy remained his confidant. Ava stayed his fire. Mia held his heart. Barbara gave him peace. And that's what makes what was discovered inside his estate so powerful. Because when you look past the fame, past the women, past the music, you start to see a man who never stopped searching for connection. A man who loved deeply, imperfectly, and forever. Behind the legend, Frank Sinatra's final hours and what came after. By the time Frank Sinatra reached the end of his life, he had already given the world more music than most artists dream of leaving behind. 59 studio albums, hundreds of singles. A voice that felt stitched into the fabric of the 20th century itself. And even though he had lived fully, loudly, and unapologetically, his death still landed like a shockwave. Sinatra died on May 14, 1998, at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was 82. At his side was his 4th and final wife, Barbara Sinatra. What the public didn't know at first was how fractured that final night really was. Early reports claimed his children were with him when he passed. That turned out not to be true. His daughters later revealed they didn't even know he was in the hospital until a doctor called to say he was already gone. Barbara hadn't told them. And just like that, an old family tension exploded into the open. But rewind a few days. In early May of 1998, Sinatra casually asked his daughter Tina how far away the new millennium was. When she told him about 18 months, he brushed it off, saying he could make it. No problem. Days later, he was gone. His health had been quietly deteriorating for years. Breathing problems, high blood pressure, pneumonia, bladder cancer, dementia. He hadn't appeared in public since suffering a heart attack in January 1997. Yet only a month before his death, Barbara told reporters he was doing well, strong, walking around, enjoying friends, brushing off rumors as nonsense. Then, on May 14th, everything collapsed. Sinatra suffered another heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. The ambulance made record time through Los Angeles traffic because millions of people were at home watching the finale of Seinfeld. Streets were unusually clear. Barbara didn't call Sinatra's children. She did call his longtime manager, Tony Opedisano. By the time Opedisano arrived, doctors and technicians were already surrounding Sinatra. He sat beside him, held his hand, and tried to keep him calm. Barbara arrived moments later and urged Frank to fight. Sinatra struggled to breathe. And then he said it. He told her he was losing. Opedisano later explained that Sinatra wasn't panicked. He had simply accepted that he'd given it everything he had and wasn't coming back from this one. Opedisano told him he loved him. Those were the last words Sinatra heard. He was pronounced dead at 10:50 p.m. 20 minutes later, doctors finally called Tina. That delay would haunt the family. In the years that followed, Sinatra's daughters made it clear they felt shut out of their father's final moments. Nancy later said Barbara had been cruel, that they were never told he was dying, and that they were only minutes away from the hospital when they learned he was already gone. Nancy said that night changed everything. She decided she would never speak to Barbara again, and she kept that promise. Still, when it came time to bury him, the family came together. Hollywood royalty filled the funeral. Musicians, actors, old friends. His headstone carried the words, "The best is yet to come." Inside his casket, They placed the things that felt unmistakably Frank: Tootsie Rolls, Camel cigarettes, a Zippo lighter, a bottle of Jack Daniels. Tina slipped 10 dimes into his pocket because her father always carried change in case he needed to make a phone call. Frank Sinatra Jr. delivered a eulogy. So did Kirk Douglas, Gregory Peck, and Robert Wagner. As the service closed, Sinatra's own voice filled the room with "Put your dreams away." He was laid to rest in Cathedral City, California. His gravestone originally read, "Beloved husband and father." Years later, someone vandalized it, chipping away the word husband. The culprit was never found. The stone was replaced. Now it simply reads, "Sleep warm, Papa." Even in death, the complications followed him, but so did the legacy. For all the family drama, the fading health, and the unresolved conflicts, Sinatra left behind something enormous. A catalog that still plays in taxis and cocktail lounges and quiet living rooms. A voice that still feels present. A presence that refuses to disappear. After his passing, Bono of U2 summed it up best, saying Sinatra was the 20th century, modern and complex, full of swing and attitude, the boss who was always just Frank Sinatra, and that we would never see his like again. And standing inside the remnants of his private world, surrounded by frozen rooms and forgotten keepsakes, that truth becomes impossible to ignore. Because Frank Sinatra didn't just leave behind music, he left behind a life. And once you really look at it, you start to understand that the legend was only part of the story. What they found in Frank Sinatra's private estate shocked his fans. For a man who made New York, New York feel like a personal anthem, Frank Sinatra actually owned just one property in Manhattan. Everything else lived somewhere quieter, across rivers, across deserts, along coastlines. Sinatra started in Hoboken. His first real home purchase came in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey. But once fame took hold, California became his canvas. From Palm Springs to Malibu, he didn't just buy houses, he built worlds. 6 confirmed properties, dozens of rentals, every one of them stamped with his personality. Pianos in nearly every room. Custom sound systems long before that was normal. Mid-century modern lines, guest houses, helipads, parking for Rat Pack nights that spilt well past sunrise with Sammy Davis Jr. and friends. And when fans finally saw what was left behind, they realized these weren't just homes. They were chapters. The first major California statement came in 1947, when Sinatra and his first wife, Nancy, commissioned twin palms in Palm Springs. 4 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a swimming pool shaped like a piano, flanked by 2 palm trees. He used a flagpole to raise a Jack Daniels flag whenever he wanted company. That was the signal. Come over. The night is open. He would later be buried with Jack Daniels and a pocketful of dimes. Twin Palms also carries the fingerprints of his second wife, Ava Gardner. One chipped sink still tells the story of a champagne bottle thrown during one of their legendary fights. The motor court remembers the night Sinatra hurled Ava's belongings into the driveway when he suspected she'd caught him with Lana Turner. That house held passion and chaos in equal measure. He sold it in 1953, right around the time their marriage collapsed. After that, he moved into what would become his true base, a sprawling compound in Rancho Mirage. He called it the House I Live In, after his Oscar-winning film. He bought neighboring lots until the property stretched over 2.5 acres. What started as a modest 2-bedroom eventually ballooned into 18 bedrooms and 23 bathrooms. This is where he settled. His fourth wife, Barbara, moved in and gently stripped away his beloved orange decor. The kitchen expanded into something fit for a restaurant. complete with commercial appliances and a wine closet. He added a helipad, a painting studio, even a full caboose converted into a private spa with a sauna, massage table, barber chair, and exercise bench. His model trains got their own building. The estate backed onto a golf course. There was a home theater. The street itself was eventually renamed Frank Sinatra Drive. His daughter Tina later said that house held the happiest moments of their lives, that you could feel it when you walked in, and that she met the world inside those walls. From there, Sinatra moved easily between luxury and solitude. In Los Angeles, he leased an enormous mid-century ranch known as Farallone, designed by William Pereira. Floor-to-ceiling windows, 16-foot ceilings, a trellis-framed pool, a guest house that once hosted Marilyn Monroe. Later, the same property became a filming location for Mad Men and Dreamgirls. In New York, he owned a penthouse overlooking the East River, where he famously slept until early afternoon. That's where he lived with Mia Farrow, until their marriage ended after she refused to leave Rosemary's Baby for his film. He sold the apartment in 1972. Later, he and Barbara lived at the Waldorf Astoria, where she dined at Le Cirque, while Sinatra preferred to eat quietly in the car outside. He also commissioned Villa Maggio, a desert gambling retreat named after his From Here to Eternity character. 9 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms, mountain views, tennis courts, parking for 24 cars, a place built for private games and closed-door nights. Then there was Malibu, a beachfront estate designed during his marriage to Barbara. 7 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, indoor-outdoor bars, ocean view terraces, steam rooms, even a private hair salon. They renewed their vows there in 1996. Years later, the property would be purchased by Mindy Kaling. Back in New Jersey, his early Cape Cod home in Hasbrook Heights had once drawn such crowds that police had to break them up. He also rented a beach mansion in Atlantic City for a single week, leaving behind a wig that still sits on display inside the house. At the Golden Nugget, his chairman's suite famously featured golden toilets. Even his childhood Hoboken townhouse eventually became part of his legacy, its value soaring simply because Frank Sinatra once lived there. And when all of it was finally cataloged after his death, the houses told a story fans weren't expecting. Not excess. Emotion. Every property carried scars. Love affairs. Late-night laughter. Broken marriages. Quiet routines. Crosswords in ink. Trains circling tracks. Flags raised for friends. Rooms frozen in time. Then came the will. Sinatra left most of his music rights to his 3 children. Each received $200,000, plus shared ownership of 1 property. He set aside trust funds for grandchildren. He left money for friends. He even left $250,000 to his ex-wife Nancy. But the bulk went to Barbara. Millions in cash, jewelry, personal belongings, the majority of his properties. And suddenly, fans understood. What they found inside Frank Sinatra's private estate wasn't just wealth. It was a life mapped out in architecture. A man who built homes the way he lived. Loud at first, then quieter, more reflective. A trail of rooms that mirrored his rise, his heartbreaks, and his final search for peace. Because when you step back and look at it all together, you don't see a crooner's real estate portfolio. You see a man trying to anchor himself. And that makes what was left behind feel far more personal than anyone ever imagined. Were you ever a fan of the Rat Pack? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.